Hello, my name is Charles, and in today's video, we are going to talk about one of the four immeasurables. Now, the four immeasurables are essentially, um, if they were divorced from the Buddhist context, they would essentially be four ways of cultivating the mind and heart for, just overall thriving for sentient beings. So, in brief, we're going to be covering equanimity, but in brief, it's loving kindness, empathetic joy, equanimity, and impartiality. So, for the first one, right, is equanimity, that we're going to be covering at least. So, to go over this, the first illustration I'm going to use is basically what we imagine or what we can use for the mind. So this will be like the thoughts bubbling up on the surface of your mind all day long, right? This is the subverbal, like essentially talking to yourself where you're like, oh, you're in the grocery store, you see a chocolate bar and you're like, oh, do I want to get this chocolate bar? Do I not? How much does it cost? Is it worth it? I had a lot of sugar, right? That's like the mental chit chat, right? Our inner voice, so to speak. And this is happening all throughout the day. Now, naturally, our mind has this state of equanimity, right? It has this pool, this serene, calm pool of equanimity. This is like, you know, the the fundamental nature of the mind, right? This nice clean pool. And it's all calm and peaceful. So, so first, right? What now, the next question would be like, okay, well, if this is the natural state of the mind, Charles, why do we, what is causing us, what makes it so we don't have that calm, serene pool all the time? Like, why are people not, calm and at ease? What is causing the strife? And so with this idea, it's kind of twofold. We'll go first with pleasure, and then with pain, and then we will summarize and tie it into a neat little bow. So first with um, pleasure. So pleasure, there's nothing inherently wrong with pleasure. Naturally, people are like, oh, it's the natural human drive for more and more happiness, right? Pleasure there's a natural level of it. Let's say I have this cup of coffee, right? My cup of coffee, I look for a cup of coffee. It's enjoyable, the smells, the taste, the feeling that it gives, the caffeine molecules are binding to the adenosine receptors, and I'm feeling more alert and focused, and that's an enjoyable experience. That's some pleasure, right? So let's say the coffee is 5 pleasure points, right? 5 pleasure points. The coffee is quite nice. I'm enjoying my nice cup of joe. So, what happens, what leads to us leaving, right? Not being able to experience this equanimity, even with a pleasurable, is what'll happen is, let's say I get 5 pleasure points, or even, let's say I have a really good meal and I get 10 pleasure points. This is an amazing, or even 100, right? This is a filet mignon steak with, all the best hors d'oeuvres, some caviar, some beautiful refreshments, some Pinot Noir wine. And right, it's just a great, great experience. You're having tons of pleasure. Now, this can be very, very enjoyable. And there's a natural amount, right? You could have a wonderful romantic experience and have loads of pleasure. You can, right? Pleasure, there's nothing wrong with it. It's natural. Humans want to enjoy some pleasure. So, what happens though, the issue, the time we leave this when we this is how like when we leave this equanimity is we get clinging. We cling. This is when the pleasure leaves. Because what happens is we have this pleasurable experience. Let's say it's the meal, right? We have a pleasurable meal. It tastes so, so good. The sushi or the steak or whatever you're eating, it tastes so, so good. You're just loving it. And then you're like, I just can't, you don't want it to end. That's the clinging. You're like, I don't want that. I want this to last forever. So that clinging, right? When we cling like that, what'll happen is, and this is where the pleasure leaves, we get the fear of loss. Fear of loss. So now we've had this pleasurable experience and we don't want it to end. So our mind makes up the story. I don't want to lose this. I want this to go on forever. And why do we lose? Why do we lose the equanimity, that peace, that calmness when we have a fear of loss? When our brain's like, I don't want to lose this, I don't want to lose this. You want to know why? Because we're not seeing things clearly. Our eyes, we're not in, so fear of loss is not accepting reality. Or basically, it's just non-acceptance, right? It's not accepting. So in the same way, right, we can have a wave of pleasure, a typhoon of pleasure, if you will, right? We can have the 100-point experience of pleasure, tons of pleasure. It's so enjoyable, right? And in the moment, if you are present with the experience, right, naturally, even in that equanimity, right? You're not anticipating the end, right? You're not anticipating like, oh, when's this gonna end if you're enjoying it? You're naturally enjoying it. But if you cling, you get the fear of loss, which leads to like, no, I don't want this to go. And that leads to not accepting reality, right? And so then now you're not accepting reality, which is the pleasure that rise like a wave in the ocean, that tide of pleasure. It'll naturally, when it in its due course, reach that state of equanimity. It'll reach that pond once again of calm mind. So instead of accepting reality, you go to the non-accepting, and that's where, since you're not seeing things clearly, you're afraid. Because you're afraid, you're not in reality, you're afraid, it's essentially a made-up story of, oh, somehow this will last forever, when all my previous experiences have been temporary. Like, not as in they're not real or not enjoyable or weren't amazing or weren't, all the worthwhile, but you're assuming that somehow as a mortal creature that they're permanent experiences. It's just not accepting reality. And since you're not in reality, there's a fear. You're like, what's going on? That'll be the natural reaction. And then what can even happen, right? And this is what leads to even more. And this is what leads to addiction in some is you're like this not accepting reality. Oh no, I don't want this to end ever because somehow I'm not going to be okay if it returns to calm mind, right? It's that fear that somehow if this pleasure leaves, you will not be okay, which is just not real. And so what'll happen is you'll dip back and you'll be like, go, and, or actually, sorry, you will not go back to equanimity. You'll be like, give me more pleasure. Because maybe if I just increase the pleasure, then, it'll keep the party going. And maybe this time you eat a big meal again, and then you only get 80 pleasure points. You've lost 20 pleasure points because of minus 20 because of the fear of loss. So now the pleasure that was once really, really good, you lose some of the pleasure points just because you have that fear of loss. You want to keep it going, right? That the fear of loss, this has got to continue, this has got to continue, I'm not going to be okay. Well, now you experience less pleasure. And so basically the way in this situation we keep the that calm, serene mind with our eyes being clear and us being reality. We accept. So, in pleasure, the way to go from pleasure and then back to calm mind, or even to experience the pleasure fully, is to have acceptance. So, whatever is going on right now in this very moment for you, that's the right experience. If it's pleasure, if it's 100 pleasure points, then you're fully experiencing in that moment the 100 pleasure points. And then when it naturally, right, the rising tide, you're enjoying it, enjoying it, enjoying it. And naturally, just like this cup of coffee in the first example, coffee's half-life is 6 hours. So for the 4 to 6 hours that it's in there, you're enjoying it, and naturally it tapers off, and you're back to the equanimity pool. And so there's no craving, there's no clinging. As long as we avoid that, because the clinging to the pleasure leads to the fear of loss, and the fear of loss leads to not accepting the reality. So the way we get out of that, and the way we fully enjoy our pleasures, is we accept they will naturally rise, be enjoyed, and naturally go away. And so now we move on to the other side of the coin, which is pain. Right? Oh, ooh, pain, right? Scary, scary. And it can be scary in some sense, but pain, right? All right. So, with the pain, what's the best way to draw this? All right. With pain, it's a similar thing. So what'll happen, right, is we will in life, right, in reality, if we accept, right, so we don't, right? This is what happens, right? We're in this equanimity pool, and it's like, oh, you know, I got to do this thing, or, something in life will bring us to the pain realm. And then we're like, no, pain realm, that stinks. I don't want to be in pain realm. And so what'll happen is you'll be like, oh, I have fear of pain. Fear of pain, fear of pain or hurt, right? Your brain's like, I don't want that. And that's when you get aversion. Now, or aversion, or in modern terms, avoidance. You're like, oh, man, I want to avoid this pain. And so if we, if we, right, pain can be very short-lived and pain can last a little while, right? And it can have its natural dip or tide and then return to equanimity through acceptance. So to get out of this, right, it's always, back to the acceptance. Pain is a natural part of life and it'll happen. And there's even good pain in the sense, right? Pain is just pain, but there, in a certain context, pain can be a good thing. So, for example, if you were working out at the gym, right, and you're lifting that dumbbell, you're accepting, like, when you're working out at a gym, for example, why does lifting that dumbbell why does that pain, why do you accept that pain? Well, because it's a good thing. It's a natural part of working out. And so it's not a problem. It's not a problem when you're working out to experience some pain because you're like, well, this is a natural part of the process. Pain will increase, you're like, I'm working out, I'm lifting the weights, the lactic acid, the soreness. Ah, now I feel pain. But you're like, that's the natural part of the process. Okay, it's a good thing. And so it'll come and it'll go, and it's no big deal. What happens is sometimes we have the pain and we're like, no, fear of pain. Oh, it's so scary. And then we get to the aversion and avoidance. And what happens is if we, avoid the painful experiences, then we are essentially stuck, right? We essentially are now limited. We don't have, because we don't have, because now we're not seeing things clearly. We're not accepting the reality that naturally as part of life, there will be some pain, unfortunately. Why the creator made it that way, I don't know. But there will be some pain. That is that's just how it's gonna work. And that's not to say that it's easy, but there will be some. And so, our brain will be like, well, I want to avoid this, I want to avoid this, like I don't want to experience the pain. And what'll happen if you're doing that is if you keep trying to avoid the pain, then you're like trapped. Then you're like prisoner. Then you're prisoner. And so in the same way here, you'll be prisoner, you'll be behind the bars of prison because you're like, oh, let's suppose you're, the the pain, right? You're like, oh, if I imagine you're a guy, right? Guys experience this. Oh, I wanna ask a girl out. I'm, the that pain of getting rejected will lead to the fear, and you're like, oh, I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. No. What if I get rejected? No. And so what that'll lead to is avoidance. And if we're in the avoidance land, what happens is we get imprisoned. Now we're stuck in the jail. We're stuck in the avoidance jail. And what happens there is you just experience in the same way you experienced less pleasure. You just now you're just experiencing now you're just experiencing more pain. Like the pain is just there because now you don't get to experience the potential pleasure. You don't even get the experience. You're just trapped behind the jail and you don't get to live life. You're not at the clear seeing that sometimes there will be pain. The equanimity mind, that calm mind knows, that centered, realistic mind knows, oh, well, there'll be some pain and there'll be some pleasure. And if I want to have this beautiful, relationship, or if I want to have this thing in life, then maybe I just have to do it. And that's a natural part. And so there's a chance, right? Your brain will be like, oh, it's uncertain. Oh no, fear. And then what happens is you'll get stuck in the avoidance jail. If you listen to that fear, which is essentially non-acceptance, the same way the non-acceptance can't the same way, so there's non-acceptance in the fear of loss and pleasure, and there's the non-acceptance of pain in the fear of pain because you're like, oh no, like I don't want, like, what happens if I experience pain? And so you're not accepting it. And then what happens is if you don't accept it, you get stuck in the pain jail. And then you're like, oh, now I can't ask the girl out, or I can't, go pursue that dream, or I can't go, you can't do it all. And then you're trapped and you're no longer in equanimity mind. You're no longer calm because you're stuck in the painville. So the same way you'll get trapped in that cycle of less and less pleasure, you'll get trapped in the cycle of pain if you don't accept, if you don't see things clearly from that calm mind of, yeah, there may be some pain and there may also be some pleasure. These are natural parts, and that's what leads to the calm mind, that equanimity. In short, to summarize, right, we're gonna make a new, new little, new little, new little, drawing here. Essentially, in short, natural state of that mind is equanimity, is clear sky, is calmness. And so what'll happen is if we want to have underlying, right? If you imagine a vast ocean, if you want to have this calm mind underlying all your experiences, right? In pain and pleasure, if you want to have in both pain and pleasure, if you want to have the calm mind, then basically the bridge between these two, the bridge between all this that links them all together is acceptance, or essentially In other words, seeing things clearly. Seeing things, or we'll just put, nice glasses. Seeing things clearly. Because if we see things clearly, we recognize there will be some pleasure, right? Pleasure will happen, and it'll be a nice little thing of pleasure. And sometimes there'll be some pain, and unfortunately, you accept that part and you continue moving. And because it's necessary for the experience of life. All right. Well, hopefully that ties it up in a beautiful little bow. As we can see, in short, seeing things clearly or acceptance of things as they are allows you to fully experience the pleasure, and it allows you to not get trapped. It gives you the key, right? You don't get trapped in the pain, and you get to fully experience the pleasure if you see things clearly. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you had a wonderful time and enjoyed this as I did. Um, until next time, much love.